You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into the things that have got you talking today.
And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. And we've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
Well, we've got a world in economic disarray post-COVID. Russia being squeezed by sanctions. And then there's the concerns that they're going to turn to China in response. Oh yeah, and the small matter of a potential World War III on the horizon. Is Biden right? Are we heading for a new world order? And does it matter? What would it look like? So many questions. And speaking of new orders, should the House of Lords be reformed or even abolished? I'll be debating that with not one, but two Lords in just a minute. And I also want to debate whether trans women should be able to compete in female sports. And also, did you know there's a new legislation that comes into force today, which means that anybody caught using their phone whilst driving could now face a fine of £1,000 and 6 points on the licence. Is that harsh or fair? And clocks go forward this weekend. What do you think? Is this all still necessary or time that we stop this? Do you see what I did there? Time? Anyway, speaking of time, it's time to look at the news headlines.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. President Joe Biden has announced a joint game plan with the EU to reduce Europe's dependency on Russian energy. The US will provide the European Union with at least 15 billion additional cubic metres of liquefied natural gas by the end of the year. Speaking at a briefing in Poland, President Biden said democratic countries need to show their commitment to freedom.
The single most important thing that we can do from the outset is keep the democracies united in our opposition and our effort to curtail the devastation that is occurring at the hands of a man who, I quite frankly, think is a war criminal.
Russia has claimed the first phase of its military operation in Ukraine has mostly been completed. The Defence Ministry says it's now focusing on the country's breakaway Donbas region, which includes Luhansk and Donetsk. The US is describing it as a negotiating tactic, which could be a climb down by Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces still reportedly control the besieged port city of Mariupol. The country's top security officials say they're holding on and no one will surrender. Tens of thousands of civilians are thought to be trapped in the city with little food, water, medicine, power or heat. 300 people were reportedly killed when Russia bombed a theatre sheltering women and children in Mariupol last week. Two men and a teenage girl have been sentenced to life in prison for the homophobic murder of a father of two in Cardiff. Jason Edwards, Lee Strickland and Dion Timms Williams were found guilty of killing Gary Jenkins in July 2021. The prosecution said the attack had been motivated by greed, homophobia and straight-up violence. All three were also sentenced concurrently for the offences of robbery and assault occasioning actual bodily harm. A man who murdered his ex-girlfriend's 2-year-old son has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 25 years. Kamar Brown and the child's mother, Felicia Shirley, abused Kyrell Matthews for weeks, leaving him with multiple rib fractures and internal injuries. Brown was convicted of murder, while Shirley was found guilty of manslaughter and jailed for 13 years. The Irish Foreign Minister is safe and has been taken to a secure location after a suspicious device was discovered outside a peace-building event in Belfast. Footage shows the moment Simon Coveney was abruptly ushered off a stage during a speech. Emergency services discovered the device in a hijacked van in the venue's car park. The Houben Centre was evacuated and forensics officers and members of the bomb squad were at the scene. Mr Coveney said he was saddened and frustrated to hear that the van driver had been attacked and held at gunpoint. The Transport Secretary has called for the resignation of the P&O Ferries chief executive. That's after Peter Hebblethwaite admitted he should have consulted unions before sacking 800 workers without notice. They're being replaced with cheaper agency staff. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the Taliban's decision to close schools to girls in Afghanistan is unjustifiable. The UK, US and Canada, along with representatives of the European Union, have condemned the decision in a joint statement. They say denying their right to an education contradicts the Taliban's previous assurances. Nargis Nehan is a former Afghan politician in Kabul. She told GB News there are millions of girls living as prisoners in the country.
Living, you don't know what you're living for. You're not treated as a human being anymore. You don't have access to the very, very basic rights. Even for small decisions such as going to the doctor, you have to have a mail company. So as a human being, you don't have any independence. You don't have any freedom. You cannot earn for yourself. You cannot decide for yourself. And the future seems very dark and bleak, and you don't see anybody around trying to help you out.
Well, on TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Miranda. Well, if you're sitting there listening to some of those stories thinking, goodness me, how depressing, I've got good news for you, because on my panel tonight, we've got Martin Wright, who is the chair of Positive News. I'm hoping he's going to be able to share at least one positive news story with us before we say goodbye tonight. Also joining me is Claire Fawkes, the Baroness of Buckley, and Daniel Moylan, a Conservative life peer in the House of Lords. You know the drill on Dewbs & Co by now. It's not just about us, it's about you at home as well and your thoughts. What's on your mind? You can get in touch with me on email gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at gbnews. Don't forget, of course, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. We're on the radio, DAB+. We've got podcasts. We're everywhere. You know what's going on by now. James has emailed straight in. No messing around with James. Very quick fingers you've got, James. You say, the House of Lords should be abolished. It's a farce and a waste of taxpayers' money, you go on to say. And while you're at it, TV licence should be abolished too. Interesting. I'll get the views of two different lords on that topic in just a couple of minutes. But first, our top story. The UK and NATO allies have urged China not to back Russia's war effort in Ukraine or help Vladimir Putin escape the sanctions imposed following the invasion. UK's International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan suggested that China could be hit with sanctions if it supplies arms to Russia, in the same way, of course, that Belarus has been targeted with economic measures. But before we get into whether or not China will even listen to the West, let's have a listen to what President Putin thinks about some of this.
And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
I tell you what, some people often say that President Biden is nearly always half asleep. I think it's me tonight, because if you're a keen observer, you will know that that was not President Putin at all. It was indeed President Biden. What he's talking about there is the potential start of a new world order. What do you think to that? Is he right? Martin?
Well, I think there's a danger, really, of an old world order coming back, particularly if we drive China and Russia into each other's arms. There's a slight danger that we find ourselves in a new and very long Cold War. We are absolutely right to back the Ukrainians. We're absolutely right to help them resist this brutal invasion. I think we're also right not to risk a nuclear war with Russia by, for example, trying to enforce a no-fly zone that would lead to us having to take out Russian airfields if we were to make it happen. I think in the long term, we have to find a way of bringing Russia back into the fold, hopefully in some kind of post-Putin incarnation. I mean, you have to admit that the West over the last 30 years or so, it has sent a lot of mixed messages to Russia. You know, on the one hand, back in the 90s, various Western leaders kept reassuring Russia, no, we're not going to expand NATO, we're going to keep NATO where it is. And then NATO went east right up to the Russian border. At other times, the West has been quite pusillanimous, quite weak regarding Russia. So when Russia went into Georgia, into Chechnya, into Crimea, you know, we sanctioned a few oligarchs, which was neither here nor there. So we sent out kind of mixed messages. And I think that led Putin to think that, OK, they won't do much if I go into Ukraine. So it's good that the West is taking a much firmer line. But it also has to hold out the prospect of Russia, as I say, coming back into the fold, becoming a European power. And I think that's particularly relevant in terms of looking at China and the West's relationship with China. The one thing I would say, and this is a tiny bit controversial, it's wonderful that we're backing the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. I don't want us to get too dewy-eyed about Ukraine. You know, there's been a kind of secular canonization of Zelensky. You know, he's being a great war leader. He's leading his people. That's marvelous. He's also just banned all the opposition political parties. Ukraine has its share of oligarchs as well. It's not a whiter-than-white regime. And so I think we need to just have a sense of proportion, while still, as I say, backing the Ukrainians to the hilt in fighting off Moscow. The one thing I would say, just briefly, is that I hope this will help accelerate the move towards a new world energy order. It is ridiculous that we spend so much money importing fossil fuels, largely from dodgy dictatorships. The UK spends 50 billion a year on average buying in fossil fuels. We spent 22 billion buying Russian oil and gas since Russia took over Crimea. That is apparently enough for 8,000 T-14 tanks. And that's exactly what he's been spending it on. We know that the speed in which renewables have been coming down in price and cost, all the sort of opportunities now for energy storage, for using renewable electricity to produce hydrogen, to drive a low-carbon economy, are accelerating fast. We can't turn our back on gas overnight, but we can move towards that transition.
Well, because it was your first time on the show with me, I thought to myself, should I start with Martin or not? Because sometimes when it's people's first times on the show, they can be a bit nervous. They might not say much the first time they warm up. No such worries with you, Martin. Very interesting stuff there. Claire Fox?
Yeah, give that man a show,
Yeah.
Actually, there's quite a lot of what Martin said that I agree with, so I won't repeat it. I suppose the one thing to develop that he said that I'm concerned about is I am concerned that we've seen example upon example of a failure of Western diplomatic skills over the last few decades, right? That This has not been the West's greatest hour. They haven't, as Martin indicated, dealt with Russia in a way that I think has been helpful for the West. This is not about appeasing, this is about being sensible. And if you get into a situation where you do give those assurances and then you go back on them. Anyway, the reason I'm mentioning that is because I'm rather concerned that we're not exactly seeing a sophisticated approach in relation to China. So the idea that the West are going around saying, now, don't you do this or we'll throw sanctions at you. I mean, it's a bit like I'm thinking, can you at this point not kind of behave as though China's a naughty child? Because when you ask the question about the redivision of the world, I mean, I am concerned that just after the war, after the Second World War, we had Yalta, and America and Britain and Russia sat around and divided Europe. And basically, they put into chains the whole of Eastern Europe. They were just given to the Soviet Union, right? Imagine the bitterness. They divided Germany in half. They basically said, you can have Hungary and Poland, we'll have these. I mean, that was the basis of the Cold War for all those years. We're getting to a situation now where this war, this is where I agree with Biden, is not just some little regional conflict. It's much bigger than that.
It is
and what
indeed.
comes out of this is going to be a new world. Now, China, we know, are not friends of the West. They would not have wanted, I'd imagine, Putin to have done what he's done. They undoubtedly will think, God, that's the last thing we wanted for our plans. They've got a problem because they do actually support the notion of self-determination, and because of all sorts of reasons, they would not want to be pushing things this way because they prefer a globalised world where the West was dependent on them. But I don't want them to be pushed into an alliance with Russia by bad diplomatic maneuvers.
Well, you say you don't
West.
want them to be, but my question, I guess, Daniel, is I think they perhaps are being, because at the end of the day, we're squeezing Russia, Russian oligarchs, and to some extent the Russian people as well. And if you do that, there will be a consequence to that. And people are hoping that the consequence to this is going to be that Putin says, yeah, all right, fair enough, I've been a naughty boy, I'll pack it in and go back then. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is he's going to start going, and as we're already seeing, actually, I can circumvent this. I can do this. I can change the currency for my oil and gas into rubles. I can get further into bed with China. So the unintended consequences of what we were intending for good may end up not being so good.
I listen to all of this with some amazement, because I think all this breastbeating and this complication you've introduced into it, all three of you, if I may say, unusually, Michelle, I find myself slightly out of tune.
You don't need to always agree with me.
Unusually, but normally you're spot on. It's much simpler than that. The world we live in and value, and our way of life, is not safe with Russia in its current mode of behaviour. And it's not just a question of Ukraine, it's the question of the use of what they hoped would be overwhelming military force to dominate their neighbours and dominate further afield. And our lives are not safe, our way of life is not safe, and the things we value are not safe, and they have to be stopped. Now, the best way of stopping them would indeed be if somebody overthrew Putin and they had their own Euromaidan movement. But much that's to be hoped for, I don't think it's very likely. What we're heading for is a period, it will be a sort of Cold War with Russia, of 20 or 30 years, which is going to have serious consequences for us. We're going to have to pay for it. We're going to have to pay for more defence spending. We're going to have to pay more for our energy. We're going to have probably to pay more for our food. But in the end, we will prevail because we can't let these people win. Now, as far as China is concerned...
But hang on, let me just, before you even get into China, you sound to me, Daniel, like someone that's on the cusp of saying that we should indeed have, for example, a NATO no-fly zone.
No, I'm not saying... we got through the last Cold War, and we have to have the skill, we have to hope Mr. Biden has the skill, to get through the next Cold War in such a way that we always just managed to avoid nuclear war. Came close to it on a couple of occasions, like the Cuban crisis in the early 1960s. We have to get through it without a nuclear war. And if the judgment is, at the moment, that directly engaging in a no-fly zone, even over the western part of Ukraine, could trigger a nuclear war, then if that judgment's correct, and I don't have a strong view, I don't have a great deal of information on that, but if that view is correct, then I would support those people who say that's not the right thing to do. But we're going to have to get through this. The alternative is you give in. You give him Ukraine, you give him back the other parts of Eastern Europe, you Finlandize Germany, you have a neutral Germany, and you have democracy left clinging on in the few fringes of Western Europe, much as it was at the time of Hitler,
can I just challenge you a little?
and perhaps in Britain.
No, but I want to challenge you a little because I didn't think that I needed to come on here and say, I support Ukraine, I want absolutely Russia to be beaten in this, because I've said that so often, I didn't think I needed to redeclare it. When you say breast beating, I recognise that one thing that has happened in this war is there has been a discombobulation by a lot of people, which is there's so much cynicism about Western leaders from people who, for example, were lockdown sceptics, or they don't believe politicians because of Brexit anymore. Or there's a real sort of cynicism, and that's conflated with a kind of left-leaning hatred of the West. That you've got all these people who just can't stand the West so much that they actually have ended up in a quagmire of kind of half support in Putin. And you even... I've been surprised by that. But I don't think it... So I recognise that, but none of us were doing it. I think that breast beating is the wrong description for trying to understand how we got here. There's nothing wrong with that, because actually, in order to work out the way that the New World Order is going to go, I think we can't ignore the failures of Western diplomacy over recent years, not because we want to have a kind of woe is me breast beating moment, but because I don't want them to make the mistakes with China. Because precisely for the reasons that you say, the stakes are high.
The mistakes you identify as making with Russia are the mistakes of not standing up to them early enough.
Well, or whatever.
And that is exactly the same mistake we can make with China.
But hang on, because Martin made a point earlier on. We're saying that the mistake we've made with Putin is purely not standing up to him quicker. Martin was making the point that actually one of the mistakes that many would argue that's been made with Putin is in some ways the antagonism, what's the word? Antagonising of him with the expansion of NATO eastwards.
Right. These are democratic countries who've escaped from the Russian yoke, who have wanted to join NATO for their own defence by a free democratic choice. And you're saying that to please Putin, we should have said to them, no. Sit out there on your own, because it'll upset, and antagonise and upset President Putin.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
You sit out there on your own, and good luck to you.
But that's not what I'm suggesting.
Nobody's saying it.
Martin,
what are you saying?
No, nobody's saying. We're saying that when the Cold War ended, if you remember what happened then, that a series of Western leaders and military leaders made it clear that in the post-Cold War period, Russian security would not be underestimated. Nobody said that to Gorbachev, by the way, because they were being nice to him. They were doing it for pragmatic security reasons of the West. They were basically understanding, well, this is a humiliated Russia. We've got to think how we deal with it. And then for a variety of reasons, those insights, those assurances, that conversation got befuddled.
Yeah, part of it got befuddled because Gorbachev, you started off with a Gorbachev who was a relatively open in embracing a sort of democratic way forward. And you progressed through a Putin who appeared a very rational, younger leader that you might be able to deal to a man who locks up his opponents, is a dictator, is elected by huge majorities, partly because nobody dares stand against him because they go straight to jail.
It's an authoritarian regime.
And it's become a totally authoritarian regime.
Let me bring Martin.
Authoritarian regimes.
It really doesn't matter what happened in 1990.
If we don't learn from 1990 or 1945,
what is the lesson we learned?
Hold on,
Martin. You won't let me answer.
Oh, sorry, Mum.
So, interestingly enough, the purpose of NATO was obviously to fend off Soviet aggression, fend off the Warsaw Pact. It did it. We won. They lost. We rolled back the frontiers right to the borders of the former Soviet Union. Ironically, at one point, when the early days of Putin, Russia was quite interested in joining NATO.
Yeah, it'd be a good
and
idea.
that would have been actually maybe quite a good idea. We don't just allow anyone to join NATO because they want to. Otherwise, Ukraine would be a member of NATO, and we've been very clear. The West has been very clear. It's very rare I speak for the West, but the West has been very clear that Ukraine won't join NATO. So I don't think there's a...
Well, they're being clear now. I think there's been a bit of mixed
There
messaging.
probably has been some mixed messaging, as there is around the EU and Ukraine as well. But I think recognising Western failures doesn't in any way abrogate our need to stand up for Ukraine now.
Yeah, and I think that I think there's a real confusion, Daniel. I think that if people seek to dig deeper than just the kind of tabloid headlines of what's gone on over the last month, then you get accused of almost being on the side of Putin, whereas to me...
No, I'm not accusing anybody
What
of
I
that.
try and do is this situation in Ukraine isn't a month old. There is so many different events over a passage of time that's led to where we are, and understanding them, conversing them, airing them. It's only that way that A, we understand them, and B, can try and resolve and move forward with them.
Well, you can say that, but the fact is, I don't see what those lessons are. We're in a situation today, the current situation we're facing is unprecedented. Russia has sent 150,000 armed men and all their tanks into an independent neighbouring country. We have to decide what that tells us about the Russia of the future.
Well,
apart from standing up for Ukraine, tells us about the Russia of today and the Russia of the future. And how we got here is interesting, historically interesting, but I haven't heard a single lesson that we should have... that is relevant to us now.
I can give you a lesson, because we're going to go... I'll do two lessons. First of all, I've got to learn a lesson in timekeeping, because I should have gone to a break about 5 minutes ago and I didn't. So that's lesson one for me. But lesson... generally, in fact, by the way, I asked a question at the start of this. Do you think we're heading towards a new world order? Biden reckons that we are. We've been running a poll on GBNews Twitter. Do you think that is right? Are we heading to a new world order? The results as it stands so far is 70% of you say yes, we are, and 40% of you say no, we're not. I'm going to take a quick break in a second. When we come back, we'll have a lot more topics and some of your responses to this topic. I can tell you we've had a lot. But in very brief essence, you asked, Daniel, what lessons should we learn? I can give you a very simple one. If a country tells you, if you do this, it's going to provoke a reaction. If you do this, it's going to provoke a reaction. And then you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it again, don't be surprised when you get the reaction. That's a lesson that I've learned in a lot of this. Very brief for Claire.
I'm saying we have to learn the lesson about how we deal with China, and I also think there's a danger that we are still fighting a proxy war in Ukraine, where we're basically saying, let the Ukrainians do it. And it's not even that I want the West in, but actually the West can talk tough, but then they say, but actually we can't do anything. You get on and fight it.
There you go.
That's not brave, in my opinion.
Multiple lessons there. I'm going to heed my timekeeping one. Go to a break. I'll see you in a couple of minutes. When I come back, I want to talk about transgender athletes in swimming, and I want to talk about the House of Lords. Should it be reformed or even abolished? I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Reminder as to who my panel are this evening. Daniel Moylan, who's the former advisor to Boris Johnson and now a Conservative life peer in the House of Lords. We've got the Baroness of Buckley, Claire Fox. Don't you sound posh when we call you the Baroness of Buckley?
Lady Fox to you.
Lady Fox. I want to be the Baroness of Hull. I could be Lady Hull. I'm going to start myself a campaign. Oh yes, and I do apologise. The man, the good news, positive newsman himself, Martin Wright, also joins me. Good evening to the three of you. Lots of you guys have been getting in touch about that last conversation about New World Order. Elsie makes a good point when we're talking about China. She says, everyone is talking about energy dependency on Russia, but what about all of our kind of dependency on goods from China, such as pretty much everything, antibiotics, microchips, clothing, tools, etc. Elsie, you make a very good point. Let's move on. Leah Thomas has become the first transgender athlete to win a National Collegiate Athletic Association swimming championship. That's a mouthful, isn't it? But her victory has attracted a bit of a mixed reception, to put it mildly. The swimmer was representing the University of Pennsylvania and won the 500-yard freestyle last Thursday. But, as I said, her win is receiving a bit of backlash, and even the likes of Caitlyn Jenner, a former Olympian herself, has said that Thomas was not the rightful winner of the championship. Let's cut to the chase, shall we? Claire Fox, Baroness of Buckley. Should transgender women be able to compete in female sports categories?
No.
Why not?
Because they aren't women. In the physical sense of all of the things that in sport should count, they have an inbuilt biological advantage, which is that they're a born man, and therefore they've gone through puberty. And the reason why we don't have mixed-sex sports in general is because it's an unequal competition.
But then why, Claire, do the sporting bodies, etc., have a collection of rules? Because I can only assume that they've done their basic biological homework and looked into the science and all this, because they have a guideline, for example, where trans women could compete. This is, of course, what we're referring to here. Trans women could compete after 1 year of having testosterone levels below 10 nanomoles, is that how you say it, per litre?
But it's not, I mean, first of all, they haven't, I mean, if they've spent a year doing their science and their biology and they haven't worked the biological difference between a man and a woman, we're in trouble, right? It's not just testosterone, it's not just to do with that. If you go through puberty, the way that your body develops, the strength that's built up and so on as a man. And in this particular controversy, I think the problem is that we get into a tangle over language. Now, you've just said, you know, Leah Thomas won, she won, you know, it's her, and so on and so forth. And then it looks like you're being unfair to a woman. And it's very difficult, but I have to just say this is a male-bodied competitor. Now, I don't want Leah Thomas not to be able to be involved in sport.
I wasn't using pronouns when I was talking about Leah. I was saying she in relation to Caitlyn Jenner.
Oh, right, sorry. But I mean, all I'm saying is we do get in a muddle, though, because we don't know how to describe trans women or trans men or what have you in terms of this. But when you say why have the sporting bodies done it, I think it's political rather than biological or scientific. That's the first thing. They've basically adopted the position that to say that trans women are not women in the sense of competitive sport would mean that they were being transphobic. They've basically gone along with that position. We know the impact of that in relation to everything from women's-only wards in hospitals, women's-only prisons, all of these different things have now got into a complete jumble over this. But the one thing to say was that when Leah Thomas was a competitor in male sport, he was ranked 554th in college sports. I mean, what happened was not that his swimming increased. He went into a different category, i.e. into women's swimming, and now he's the champion.
Yeah, I mean,
She's the champion. Leah is the champion. What I'm saying is that that's not because of an increase in sporting prowess. That's because the competitor was entered into a women's category.
So are you saying that all trans women have a competitive advantage over biological women? Well, why didn't that the weightlifter Laurel Hubbard? Why didn't she win then?
Well, they've got a competitive advantage. Doesn't mean they're any good. That's a completely different thing, right? I mean, you know, like you could have. There's lots of males in the world. Men in the world who, if you put them into the swimming pool with those swimmers, would be open.
But if a man is biologically stronger, Daniel, if a man is biologically stronger than a woman and the sport is lift something, then one would assume that the biological man would win the biological female and lift more.
Well, as Claire said, some people I couldn't lift. I can barely lift a piece of paper that I dropped on the ground. So it depends what you're good at. I generally agree with Claire. It's cheating. That's what it is. It's a form of cheating.
And how can it be cheating if the rules say it's OK?
Oh, well, because the rules have been written so as to allow cheating. It's as simple as that. And they've been written that way, as Claire says, because sports bodies have been ideologised, bullied, harassed, persuaded, taken over by, whatever, people who hold this view as a matter of ideological belief.
Yeah, a matter of faith.
Martin?
Ha! Man wades into minefield. Looking forward to being branded.
Welcome to GBNews,
Good stuff.
Martin.
Looking forward to being branded as trans exclusionary radical feminist and never eating lunch in Stoke Newington again. I mean, the bottom line, I have to largely agree with Claire and Daniel, I'm afraid. The bottom line is that sport should be a level playing field. Of course, everyone should be able to participate in sport, but it seems unfair to have certain people with certain bodies from birth coming up against the sort of people they wouldn't normally come up against, as it were, in an unequal contest. How you resolve that, whether you measure hormone levels, testosterone levels, whether you measure weight and height levels, whether you even have a different category for trans people, you know, an entirely separate sporting category, I don't know. But it's basically unfair if you're not competing more or less on a level playing field, at least level allowing for the differences in accidents of birth, etc.
But hang on, because the single most important psychological factor, physiological factor for endurance athletes is haemoglobin. Haemoglobin levels are higher in men, which allows more oxygen to get into the muscles, but haemoglobin levels follow the testosterone. So within weeks of starting testosterone suppression, then testosterone levels will be within female norms. So what they're saying is that the science means that you can make various amendments/interventions to make it a more level playing field.
Well, there's another piece of science is men generally, not in all cases, men generally have longer limbs and longer muscles to go with them, and longer muscles can move greater loads. And that's not affected by testosterone.
It's not. I mean, if you only go on the testosterone thing, you're in trouble, and that's what they're trying to do. I mean, this isn't very scientific, but I do think one should look at Leah Thomas and just go, hello. Right, I mean, I'm just serious, right? Look at that athlete.
Yeah, but then someone showed me another picture of a female swimmer, and I've got to say, female swimmers are not really my forte, so I can't pick them all out of lineups, but someone showed me another picture of a female swimmer, and I've got to say, and I'll cut to the chase, I thought, oh, blimey, she looks like a bloke. And it wasn't. It was a woman.
I know, and that's why I said it's crude. But all I'm saying is that I do feel as though we're all being, what's that phrase? Gaslit, right? Because you kind of end up thinking, you know, you kind of think, this is somebody who was a man, who's still got the body of a man. Can we just, as an aside, right, this is not somebody who's kind of like had fully transitioned for 20 years and become a woman.
Right, when you say a woman, let me ask you a basic, simple, well, what I thought was a basic, simple question. I mean, I was always under the assumption that was simple. But people reckon this day and age, Claire, you can't even define what a woman is.
Yes, well, that obviously politically, no politician defines what a woman is because they're frightened they're going to be called transphobic. We know that. You can't say that a woman is somebody with a cervix. You get into all sorts of trouble if you say that it's a biological thing. Obviously, women shouldn't be reduced to their biology, but when they're erased as biological sex, then you start to get anxious, if you may. I mean, listen, think of the consequences. It actually came out in the Lords last week, this story, and then was in the newspapers, which is a woman on a women's ward in a hospital gets raped. says to hospital, I was raped on ward. They say you couldn't have been raped on the ward because it's a woman's ward. It takes a year, and actually a baroness, as it goes, Baroness Nicholl, to raise this in the House of Lords, but then the NHS to admit that actually there was a transgender woman on the ward, but because they said it was all a women ward, therefore the woman couldn't have been raped. And it's like you're kind of going, but there was somebody who raped me. Leah Thomas, whether we like it or not, as you will have read in the all of the coverage, actually has a male penis. I mean, I wouldn't want to mention it, but this is something I thought I ought to say, because it's not to be denied, and you feel as though it's embarrassing to have to say that means it's not a woman. I'm just pointing out.
But then what I don't get right is I am not, obviously, a professional athlete. But if I was a professional athlete, and to be a professional athlete, you have to make a heck of a lot of sacrifices in your outlook, your diet, your lifestyle, everything. So if I was a professional athlete and I was doing all of this and I was at the level of being an Olympian, and then I was put into a situation where there was somebody who had an unfair physical advantage, I wouldn't race against them. I'd say no, I'd speak to my female competitors, I'd say, look, collectively, if we collectively think this is unfair, then I'm stepping away from this. So this is the bit that I don't get. Surely, people within this sport, if it is indeed, because, look, let's be blunt about this, we're all in the same or similar mindset, but then we must be missing something. I think we must be missing something. The people that know what they're doing and what they're talking about.
I think they're worried about the power of the governing bodies, which have huge power over who participates and so forth. That's both the national governing bodies that choose national teams and the international governing body in most sports. And I think they're worried about causing trouble, which could see them banned. Even a short ban for a top athlete can be enough to end your career, because your peak performance period is a few years only in most sports. It's not entirely true in tennis, but in many sports, you've only got a few years. And you could risk those few years if you antagonize the authorities. So you're asking these athletes, these girl athletes, these lady athletes, to take a very big risk. And I can see why they might be reluctant to do it.
It shouldn't be down to the athletes, that's passing the buck. It should be down to the governing bodies. And they have to get...
These are young competitors, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, if you're watching this, you might be at home and you're shouting at your screen, maybe we're missing something, and if you're watching this saying it's absolutely right and fair, I mean, this is nothing against trans women, trans men, whatever. I sometimes get confused about what all the terminology is, but, I'm not against anyone that's trans. What we're asking the question is it fair? Is it a fair, level playing field for it to be a category like this? So if you're shouting at your screen saying, absolutely, yes, it's fair, these lot don't know what they're talking about, get in touch with me. Tell me, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at gbnews. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the House of Lords. What do you think to it? It's often called the second largest chamber in the world, behind only China, and already lots of you are saying get rid of it. Well, if I get rid of it, what am I going to do with the two people sat next to me? We'll have a chat about that in a couple of minutes. Don't go away.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Probably.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a brief reminder as to who my panel is in case you're listening and not watching tonight. We've got Daniel Moylan, who's the former advisor to Boris Johnson and now Conservative life peer in the House of Lords. Claire Fox, Baroness of Buckley, also the director of the Academy of Ideas, and Martin Wright, who's the chair of Positive News. What is Positive News, by the way? Is it a network, magazine? What?
It's a magazine, a website, social media network dedicated to good journalism about the good stuff that's going on in the world.
Is there much good stuff going on in the world?
Shed loads of good stuff. It's just the mainstream media tends to focus on the bad stuff because that's what journalists think it's all about. So we tend to balance the media diet a bit by covering good stories about people getting on and changing the world for the better.
Well, let's talk about changing the world for the better then, shall we? Take your cue there. I was asking about the House of Lords, what your thoughts on it are. You will have just noticed I'm joined by not one, but two members of it. Now, you know, there's lots of conversations, and let's be honest, they've spanned for years and years and years about, do we need the House of Lords? Shall we reform it? Shall we scrap it? It is, of course, the second largest chamber, second only to China, by the way. I think that tells us a lot of what we need to know. There's nearly 800 sitting Lords. 800? Really? Do we need that many? Daniel Moylan?
Yeah, I think you probably do need that many because they only get paid if they work, and quite a lot of them don't turn up.
667, by the way, is the official number.
But quite a lot of them don't turn up after a while, and you need probably about 600 in order to get the 300 who need to do the work, if you see what I mean, because it isn't a full-time job. And you're only paid if you turn up.
What's the purpose of the House of Lords in your mind, Daniel?
Well, I think that's what you've got to clarify. If you're thinking about what you want to change it with, you need to understand what it does, and do those things need to be done, and how could you do them better?
Yeah, so what's it do then?
So what it does mainly is it goes through, its main purpose is it's a legislation factory. It goes through all the new laws that the government is coming up with, and it proposes changes to them. Now, some of those changes challenge the government gets very cross about them. But actually a huge number of changes made in the House of Lords are made by the government, having actually listened to the argument, because they realised they didn't get it right in the Commons first time round. The Commons doesn't spend very much time scrutinising legislation. They have lots of guillotines and timetables that limit the amount of time. And a lot of that scrutiny gets done in the Lords. Could you do it better with a different chamber that was elected? You probably could, but an elected chamber would have a lot more power vis-à-vis the Commons, and the Commons probably doesn't really want that. But I wouldn't mind if you had an elected chamber.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the number of hereditary peers, by the way. I think the concept that you're just born a lord, I think it's appalling. I think the number of hereditary...
I think that's a real connection.
You think it's marvellous?
We have an ancient and historical constitution. We have an hereditary monarchy. There are hereditary elements in our constitution that are really important to the continuity of our country, that speak to the roots of where we come from. And the fact that there are 90 hereditary peers in the House of Lords, I think, is one of its glories.
Well, I
and by the way, they are the ones who do more work than anybody else.
The one thing I'd say to you, Michelle, so first of all, I think the House of Lords should be abolished. People are going to think that's mad because I'm in the House of Lords. What am I doing there? I'm a hypocrite. And it is true that I had to think long and hard about taking a peerage because I do think it should be abolished. Why am I doing it? So I had to decide, well, while it's still there, do I use it for what I think is important or not? But the reason I think it needs to be abolished is because I do think that having an unelected second chamber that has a disproportionate influence on the decision-making around legislation is problematic, because ultimately, as a Democrat, I think that the key thing are elected politicians being accountable to the people. Right, so that's that bit. On the hereditary bit, though, what I would say is, a lot of people want to make a fuss about the hereditary peers. I actually think that we're much more undemocratic than them, because having appointed peers, I mean, what's so good about that, right? There's a kind of cronyism. I don't mean us. But what I mean is,
I'm sure you're a bit of a crony.
What I'm saying is that they're just like, a lot of the people in the House of Lords are people who, for example, lost their seat in a general election. The electorate didn't want them, and then their mate, who's the Prime Minister, put them in the House of Lords. And sometimes they become ministers in the House of Lords. So, and so I don't think the hereditaries are an issue. They're as small a group than anyone else. If you're going to do something, but just one positive thing. So I think it should be abolished. I don't know how it should be done, that you have a scrutinising body. But, I just spent the morning in Bronzeville Prison. No, I wasn't locked up, for the viewers that were wishing that I'd not been let out. It's a fantastic women's prison, and I really enjoyed being shown around by some of the residents, the staff there, and all the work they did. And it was a kind of weird experience, because I suppose I was sort of invited, partly because it's the Academy of Ideas, and we're thinking about doing a debating competition there. Partly it was for their new wing, but partly it was a bit like they had a Baroness visiting, right? And so the other thing is that you've suddenly discovered that you've got this artificial title, which is like that I'm Lady Fox, and that will mean that people will say, well, come and do that. And try and do some good work with it. That's the point I'm making. I hope I can
It's a position of elevation, isn't it?
It's a position of elevation which I don't deserve. But I think you can try when you're there. I put all my speeches on social media, not just because I'm vain, as it were, but because I think I've got to be accountable for what I say.
I do the same.
I do a weekly Inside the Lords thing where I kind of do the gossip of what's happened, my journey, so that, because I feel ridiculous that I'm there as a politician and that nobody can cancel me.
Well, Chris has just emailed in saying, you only get paid if you turn up. Well, how much do you get paid then, Michelle? Well, correct me if I'm wrong, you two, but £323 per day.
Per day, yeah.
Per day, plus expenses.
No, not plus expenses.
No. Oh, I've got it. Plus travel and subsidised restaurant facilities. That's what I've got.
Yeah, I know.
Is this wrong?
You only get, some people get.
But it's still a lot of money. Look, people are struggling in a house of, in a cost of living crisis, right? We know it's a lot of money, and it's not a job.
Well, Martin.
Well, you get paid when you clock on, don't you? You don't get paid when you clock off, when you say you've actually done some work, which might be an interesting way of doing it.
No, you have to do some work.
You have to do some work to get paid, do you?
Do you? So could you go to the House of Lords,
that's interesting,
clock in, go to the subsidised restaurant for lunch, and then go home again, and get your £323
It's possible that you could, but most people who go in don't do that. Look, there's lots of things wrong with the House of Lords, but this sort of stuff is not...
You need
I think that, the thing is, what's the House of Lords for? We have to decide that first.
Yeah, that's right.
Once you've decided what it's for, then you can decide what kind of beast it should be.
Yeah.
Daniel's point about it being, a legislative platform, reflecting, reviewing, going through the details of the law, kind of makes sense. Is it the best way of doing that? How do we choose the people who are in it? I think if we just replaced it with an elected second chamber, it would be a carbon copy of the House of Commons. It would be tedious political point scoring, and we don't really want that.
It'd be much more expensive.
What else should we do? Should we look at, the ancient Greek thing of having a lottery and people being dragged into, a place where they can scrutinise legislation? Maybe that would be an interesting way of doing it. Get some traffic wardens into the House of Lords, get some plumbers into the House of Lords, and call it something other than the House of Lords.
Yeah, I disagree with you in terms of abolishing it. I have to say, I do think it's almost essential to have checks and balances in terms of what the Commons are doing. So you need somebody to be able to check, to bounce across, to oversee, I guess.
But that's a scrutiny. I suppose the difficulty is, Michelle, that it is true what Daniel said, which is that there's not enough time scrutinising in the House of Commons. But, maybe there should be more time scrutinising in the House of Commons for a start off, and committees scrutinising. The problem is that once it comes to the Lords who are not elected can change legislation. And I know the government can agree to it, but they can get bounced into it because in order to get something through, they have to make compromises with people in the House of Lords who are not elected. And I do think that's a compromise of democratic accountability.
And what about fixed term? Because you're a life peer. I don't think you should be. No offence.
No, but that's what the peers are. That you're given a life peerage, right?
No, but that's what I'm saying. I don't agree with that.
No
offence, Daniel. I think that you should have a fixed term.
People could. You can easily envisage having an elected second chamber where people are elected for 15 years on 5-year rolling cycles, a third every 5 years. You could have a different electoral system. But the consequence of that would be, first of all, we get no support, we get no secretaries, we get no staff, we get nobody working for us. We're lucky if we get a desk in a shared office. The first thing that would happen is every one of those people would have to have 3 researchers and a secretary, a suite of officers for themselves, just like the Commons, because you couldn't do it any other way. They'd have to have a proper salary, not just this gig economy, turn up if they're sitting and you might get paid, which is what we're on. So it'd be very much more expensive. And of course, the first thing they'd be doing is they'd be saying to the Commons, we're elected too, so you've got to listen to us. And you get this ding-dong going on, which other countries manage. So it's manageable, but it diffuses accountability, in my view, in a way that the House of Lords doesn't, because generally speaking, if the government really wants something, the House of Lords will give way, normally, on most of its changes.
Well,
and give them up if the government says, if the Commons says, we're really not going to have
Well, they have to, constitutionally, eventually, don't they?
Yeah. No. There is a funny bit, Michelle, which is that when I went there, the only other time that I've been involved in kind of politics in this way, because I've never been interested in being a parliamentarian, which is ironic, because this is what I've ended up doing, is when I was elected to the European Union, right, as a European Parliament. And when I went over there, I had 3 offices and a huge staff budget. I mean, I don't just mean me, every MEP did, right? And so when I went into the Lords, I said, oh, do I get an office and is there a staff budget? And they went,
where's my entourage?
Don't be ridiculous. But one thing that Daniel was saying is right, is if you're working peers as we are, and this is not in any way to say we work so hard.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
No. But what I'm saying is,
expensive if they were elected.
If you are a working peer, you do a lot of work, and you have to do it yourself. That's what you do. That's perfectly reasonable as far as I'm concerned.
I'm not complaining.
But as you say, if it got bureaucratised and it got turned into a more... that's what you're saying, is you could end up with like lots of people saying, I need to have so many assistants. So the main thing is, for me, the democracy point.
Yeah, I've got to say, there's a real kind of mixed response coming through on the email. Lots of you in favour of abolishing it, and I mean lots of you. But lots of you also see the need for it to actually do some checks and balances and hold the House of Commons to scrutiny. That's how some of you are putting that through. I've got to say, I agree with that. I don't think abolish, but I do kind of think shake it up a bit. Certainly reduce it, by the way. I'd also give them a pay cut as well, 323 quid. By the way, though, I will close the show by admitting that I'm going to be a massive hypocrite, because I got to say, if Boris Johnson comes to me and says, Michelle, I know you've just been slagging off the House of Lords, but do you want to be in it? I tell you, quicker than a quick thing from Quickland, I'd be in there. Baroness of Hull, Lady Michelle, I'd be all over it like a skin rash. And yes, I do know that makes me a hypocrite, but why not, eh? Anyway, that's all I've got time for. Daniel, Claire, Martin, thank you very much for your time and company tonight. And thank you for your company at home. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. And Boris, if you're listening, Lady Michelle, Baroness Michelle's got a great ring to it. I'll see you all on Monday.
Hello again, I'm Luke Mile with your forecast, and plenty of dry, warm and sunny weather to come as we go into this weekend. If you like it dry and warm, as I say, we've got plenty of it to come. High pressure in charge of our weather, which means the weather's not moving very quickly. It's staying fairly stable, and there's not much winds around, with those isobars few and far between across the map. So it stays settled. Aside from a weather front just affecting the far north of Scotland, that'll bring some cloud and outbreaks of rain to Shetland over the next 12 to 24 hours. But away from that, through Saturday into the early hours, that is, we'll see plenty of clear skies. So a chilly start to the day. Temperatures dropping down to 1s and 2s, so there will be a touch of frost, I think, first thing. 1 or 2 mist or fog patches as well. But we are compensated with a lot of blue skies to wake up the day with, and plenty of sunshine lasting throughout for most places. We will see a bit more cloud around the west of Scotland and across the Northern Isles and the far northeast of Scotland too. A little bit of fair weather cloud may bubble up elsewhere, particularly over the Pennines, but for the vast majority, it once again will be a warm and sunny afternoon. 19 degrees the top temperature, could even get close to 20 in a few places. The average for this time of year is around 12 or 13 degrees. Through Saturday evening then, a lot of fine weather to end the day. A few bits and pieces of cloud melting away, and it stays dry and clear. But we will start to see more cloud drifting in off the North Sea. Low cloud at that, so misty and murky conditions developing for eastern Scotland, eastern England, East Anglia and the southeast of England as well. A bit more of a breeze in the southeast will make it feel that bit cooler as well. And that low cloud just drifts its way a little bit further westwards as we go through the day on Sunday. So a different picture for some central and eastern areas of the country. A lot more cloud around, feeling colder than it has done of late. Further towards the west is where we'll see the best chance of that sunshine and those higher temperatures. But it stays dry with some sunshine into next week. Cooler by Tuesday. Bye-bye.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically